Listen to one another. Be understanding. Be tolerant. Hear what's right and what's true, and change your mind about those things you've been wrong about. We are on page 106 in the Art Scroll Ashkenaz Siddur. At the top, the very first blessing on page 106, which has above it the words in Hebrew, Kibbutz Galuyos, which means the gathering of the exiles, or on the English side it says ingathering of the exiles. I didn't know that there's such a thing as an outgathering, so I don't really know what an ingathering is. But maybe you'll help me understand it. Maybe that'll be relevant to know the difference between if there's different types of gatherings, some which are not together, because we're going to see just a sneak peek on the very second line, the first two words. It says v'kabetzenu yachad, which means and gather us together. So I don't know how to gather other than together. Is there a way to gather apart? So we'll have to consider what that wording means. I prepared something, but we'll see what you guys say. So that's how we're going to start. We're going to read, as usual. We're going to read through it in Hebrew with a rudimentary translation. I'll open it to your questions, and then I will continue with what I've prepared. Okay, everyone ready to go? Mm-hmm. Okay. Here we go. Teka b'shofar gadol. Blow a great shofar, or a big shofar, a big horn. We know what a shofar is, right? Lecherusenu, for our freedom. Blow a big horn for our freedom. V'sa nes, and bear up, lift up, carry a nes. A nes, usually we consider the word nes to mean a miracle, right? And we have Hanukkah coming up. Nes gadol hayasham. There was a big nes, a big miracle. But that's actually only one of the meanings of the word nes. Another meaning of the word nes is a banner, something lifted up high, or like a tall pole is a nes. A beam is a nes. Okay, so bear up here. It's bear up, lift up a banner. L'kabetz galuyosenu, to gather in our exiles. So imagine, if you will, like a beacon, or some type of a flag waving that you can see from afar because it's raised up high. The higher you raise the banner, the further away people can see it. So we have these exiles that are all over the distant corners of the earth. So we ask God, you're going to have to raise a very high banner to get everybody's attention, and that so everybody can now come and center in around this banner. So lift up a banner to ingather the exiles, our exiles. V'kabetzenu yachad, here we said, and gather together. V'kabetzenu yachad. This verb comes up a couple of times, like we just had. V'sa nes, pick up a banner. Lekabetz. So look at the word lekabetz, which is the infinitive form of the verb that has as its root the letters kuf, bet, tzadi, kabetz, gather together. So that we had that over there. Raise up a banner, likabetz, to gather, and then here it's kabetzenu, and gather us, yachad, together, me arba kanfos haaretz, from the four corners of the earth. Baruch ato Hashem, blessed are you Hashem. And by the way, I've been ignoring this for the last few classes, but I want to remind everybody that in the first set of classes that we did, when we first started out Shemoneh Esreh and we analyzed the word Baruch, we more or less concluded that the word Baruch, when we say blessed be Hashem, what does it mean? Blessed be Hashem. How can you bless Hashem? How can you give an increase unto something? To bless means to increase. How do you give an increase unto something which is infinite? We really mean sort of Hashem's revelation in the world. We want to bring Hashem's revelation into the world stronger, such that the world is uplifted and becomes a better place. The more goodness is brought into the world, the greater revelation is Hashem, who's the source of that goodness. So therefore, when we ask for things, when we're requesting things, what we're really thinking about is that we are trying to bring, the mission of the Jew is to try to bring the world to its ideal state. And that's done through our actions, and it's also done through our prayers. And we're asking Hashem, please bring the world into its ideal state. by revealing yourself in it more, that is, to be that he is blessed in the world, increased, the revelation of him is increased in the world in this particular manner, which is the ingathering of the exiles, which is going to herald a sort of ideal time.
So you're saying that it's not really blessing Hashem, it's asking that Hashem's blessings be on us.
Yeah, pretty much. So that was an old class, but I've been for the fast, because that's a big concept. It was a heavy concept, and it was like a big chunk of the class. I've kind of been ignoring that as I've just been translating it as blessed are you, Hashem. And I just want to come back to it and remind everybody what that means when we say blessed are you, Hashem, what we're doing. And you should think about this when you're praying. It's a very powerful, it's a very meaningful experience to do this, is that come into the world. And that when we say blessed are you, Hashem, we're actually drawing into the world this force to raise the world up in a way. So you should like feel that you're doing that when you're saying those words. You're drawing down this divine influx and divine blessing into the world. So blessed are you, Hashem. The revelation of your goodness is increased in the world, shall be increased in the world. In the capacity that you are, Mekabetz nidchei amo Yisrael. There's that verb again, kuf bet tzadi, gather. Mekabetz, that you are the gatherer, or it can be an active verb in this case, that you are presently gathering. Nidchei amo Yisrael. Let's look at those words. Nidchei amo Yisrael means those of amo Yisrael, his nation. Here we are in the third person again. I'm not going to go back to that, but those of his nation. We receded into third person. It's another class. You are ingathering those of his nation who are nidachim, the nidchei amo Yisrael. What does it mean to be nidach? Nidach means to be more than separated. It means to be like pushed away. Those who've been sort of cast away, you are bringing those back in. Who is gathering the castaways of the Jewish nation, the nidchei amo Yisrael. Okay, fine. That's a basic rudimentary understanding of these words. And now I open it up to your questions. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you're talking about our ingathering of the exiles, or blessing Hashem for doing this. We're not all in Israel.
Right.
We're here.
Right.
So,
we're not.
This?
Isn't that the point? In other words, we're not saying thank you for gathering us in. We're saying, do this, please. We beg of you, bring this about. We're in this section of Shemoneh Esreh of requests.
Okay, so we're not thanking, but we're requesting.
Right. We are not in the section of thanksgiving. We're in the section of requests. Speaking of which, as we have mentioned before, we are now entering the second half of the section of requests. Again, the Shemoneh Esreh is initially 18 blessings with an added 19th blessing, which we'll talk about when we reach it. But initially 18 blessings, the first 3 of which are praising God, and we did a class on that. The middle 12 are requests from God, and the last 3 are thanks to God. Of those 12 middle, we said that they're divided in half. There's the first 6 and there's the last 6. I told you that the first 6 are those blessings that relate to the individual, and the last 6 are those that relate to the nation. RAV SCHWAB made the point of saying that they all relate to the nation, which of course we agree to, and the first 6 are those that relate to the nation in its present state, and the last 6 are those that relate to the nation in its future state in the Messianic time. Okay? I mentioned last week that RAV SCHWAB hinted that according to Rav Hirsch, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the division is like I initially said it, individual versus national. There was a hint in the way he referenced Rav Hirsch that way, and that happens again in this bracha that he refers to Rav Hirsch in the same way, as I will now demonstrate. First 6, last 6. Last week we mentioned that according to Rav Hirsch, as Rav SCHWAB cites him, the first 6 correspond to the last 6. So that the first of the requests, which is the 4th blessing of Shemoneh Esreh, corresponds to the 7th of the requests, okay, which is the 10th blessing of Shemoneh Esreh. I hate numbers also, okay? So if I'm confusing you, my deepest apologies. But in other words, the first of the requests, which was the request for knowledge, corresponds to this, which is the first of the second half of requests, which is the ingathering of the exiles, okay? And I just want to point out that the way he quotes Hirsch is saying, just as we asked for knowledge on the individual level in that blessing, we are again asking for knowledge on a national or more than national, on a global level in this blessing. How so? How so? Because since we are now entering the Messianic era with the request for the ingathering of the exiles, what happens during this era? It's the era in which there is a universal recognition of God. Universal knowledge of God is one of the features, one of the characteristics of the Messianic era. So as we enter the Messianic era, we now correspond to the blessing for knowledge, the request for knowledge. Yeah.
So does that make it the nest?
Wow. So say more what you mean.
Well, it says that we're to raise a banner.
Right.
And we're talking about the increase of knowledge of Hashem.
Right.
So I'm just thinking, is it connected to that?
Beautiful connection. Beautiful connection. Says my friend Nachshon that the raising of the banner is that everybody should see something that wasn't seen before. The banner, so to speak, of God. Now, not only is that correct, but that is the connection. Why does a miracle and a banner have the same word in Hebrew? What's the connection? The connection is when a miracle occurs, it's as though God is raising his banner for all to see, and he says, here I am. You didn't know where I was before. You didn't see me. You didn't have knowledge of me. I'm raising my banner. When a miracle happens, it's God raising his banner. That's why the Hebrew word for miracle is a nes, meaning a banner. So a miracle is Hashem's banner. In English, you don't have such a linguistic connection. But in Hebrew, that's the deeper meaning of nes, that we call a miracle, and nes, that we call a banner. It's the same exact thing, just on a different level. That's all. Okay. Not only that, but also the blowing of the shofar. There's a blowing of the shofar. There's a great sound that everybody's going to hear, because this blowing of the shofar is going to herald the ingathering. So it's like a call. It's a beacon. It's a clarion call. What's that sound? Oh, time to go. Right? Where's that sound coming from? Let's go towards the sound. And the banner. So the shofar and the banner are sort of the announcement and the revelation that everybody should see and know about God. Everyone with me? So far so good? Yeah?
It feels like these brachos could be a little more conciliatory. It feels like we're making not just a request, but not quite a demand, but something between a request and a demand. It's like if we were asking our Father for something, where would the please be in
Right.
there? You know, you're asking your Father for a great gift, and just to ask for a request to begin with, you know, how you kind of you introduce it in a different way, and it feels like that we don't have an introduction. Like to Kab Shofar Gadol, are we asking Hashem to blow the shofar?
Yes.
Okay. Like, please blow the shofar.
So,
Like, you know.
yeah, that's a great point. You know, what occurs to me is that you use the word please typically when you're asking for something that might cause some degree of, hardship to another person or inconvenience or whatever. This particular prayer, when you ask people for something they desperately want to give you anyway, when you're asking them something that they want to do, I don't know, I find it very easy not to use the word please in those circumstances. And this kind of impresses me in that way. It's almost like, hey, we know you want this, and we want you to know that we want this too. So let's cut through all of that, that please and thank you stuff. Just know, we want to have what you've wanted for us. So I don't know, one perspective.
I get that. I really like that, the way that sounds. But if our tradition is to always teach and to model, then, we're missing, I feel like we're missing a model lesson in how to ask. We're missing, like, the opportunity.
Does it exist in the other?
No, I think we should
They're all
review
there.
them all.
Okay, so stop. Now, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on this, Doctor?
It's not, my nusach is exactly the same.
You know exactly, because I've noticed in the Nusach Sfard, and I don't know if this is true for the Nusach of the Eidot Mizrach, the Sfaradi community, the Sephardic community, but I've noticed in Nusach Sfard, which is the text for the Hasidic communities, that there's a lot more words added in along those lines, like nah. Like nah gets in there a lot. No, which means like please, basically. So I don't, again, I'm not gonna opine which version is somehow more authentic than another. I would say, the diplomatic approach to the different versions of the Shemoneh Esreh is that, in fact, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly who composed the Shemoneh Esreh, composed multiple versions of it, because really, ideally, there's 12 tribes, which maybe we'll have a chance to talk about tonight. There are 12 tribes, and each one of the tribes prays differently, and their text would be, they might have the same basic skeletal structure and address the same 18 topics over the course of the 18 blessings. However, their wording would reflect a little bit differently the character of that group. That being said, we know that the Mishkan had 4 sides, and on each side was 3 tribes of 12. Okay, so there were 4 camps. There were like 4 machanos, 4 camps around the Mishkan. That's the tabernacle. And each one of those camps had like one chief tribe over the 3. Right? Now, the Shla, somewhere, I don't remember where, the Shla quotes the Arizal as saying that there are 4 groups within the Jewish people today that correspond to the 4 camps, and each one of these groups has their own particular customs that correspond to the customs that were characteristic of those 4 camps, and for that reason, each one of these 4 groups should hang on very tightly to their customs because they're very important for each one of those groups. In other words, our differences are important. The differences between the different groups are important. It's not the result of like a mistake. Somebody messed up along the way and it mutated into a new creature. But that it was always designed to be, so to speak, different strokes for different folks. Okay? Now, I'll tell you what the 4 groups are that the Arizal identifies, and it's going to sound a little funny to us. But one of them, he says, is Ashkenazim. Another group, he says, is Sephardim. The third group, he says, are the Italian Jews. You don't hear much about the Italian Jews today. And the fourth group are the Catalonian Jews, which you also don't hear about much today. Now, Catalonia, as far as I know, is like a region in Spain. Right? So it seems like there was a difference in the Arizal's time anyway, between the customs of the Catalonian Jews and the Spanish Jews. And I think the Spanish exile had already occurred in the time of the Arizal, if I'm not mistaken. So it means that these communities in exile held on to the customs of their place. And he said, these 4 groups, got to hang on tight. So it seems like we've only got 2 out of the 4 that are really identifiable today, to my knowledge. I don't. It could be if you go to Italy, you'll see that they have particular customs. I think they do, but it's not like
after the temple was destroyed and Rome took over, so a lot of Jews were captives and taken to Rome.
Yeah, for sure.
So
For sure. I mean, there is a community, and I do think they have their own customs and their own stuff. It's sort of. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's the Romaniot or whatever.
What about the Anusim?
The Anusim were. I mean, those are the so-called Marranos. I assume you're talking about the crypto Jews. I mean, today most of them are the descendants of those people. Today are devout Christians. You know what I mean?
Right.
And they still shut the shades Friday night or whatever, Friday afternoon, and they go into the basement and they light candles and. They do all kinds of weird things because their grandmothers did it.
There
right?
was an article on
Nobody knows why.
today.
Yeah.
I get every couple of days. They send all these really interesting articles. Today there was one about this woman who had immigrated to Florida, to Miami from Cuba. And when her family was in Cuba, they would burn a little piece of the bread, they would check for bugs, but she was a devout Catholic. But so she ended up learning about Judaism, she converted to Judaism, and then she did this genealogical thing. It took 10 years. She was able to go back 15 generations through the mother's line to Spain in the 1500s, and she is,
She always was Jewish.
Always was Jewish. Fascinating article.
A lot of those folks out there.
In today's digest from ish.com.
That's amazing. So the reason I was saying all this is that there are differences in some of the nuschaos, and we don't know quite where these differences arose, but we can say that there was always intended to be perhaps nuance in the tone of the prayer between different groups, because the characteristics of the different groups called for a slightly different approach or tone in prayer. To elaborate on that a little bit, I've been listening to a lot of classes by Y.Y. Jacobson, who's he's amazing, just unbelievable speaker and teacher. And he talks a lot about the two ways of serving Hashem. There's the Yaakov way and there's the Esav way. In other words, we think Esav, he's a total Eisvarf, as they say in Yiddish. He's a total reject. Like the worst thing that ever was created, we want nothing to do with him. But it turns out that it wasn't the original intent of Esav. When Rivka is having these strange pangs in her belly, and when she passes by unholy places, there's an urge for one of the babies to emerge, and then when she passes by the holy places, there's an urge for the other baby to emerge, and she doesn't know that there's two, and she's confused. What is the inclination of this child? And then she goes to the prophet, who tells her, there are two nations inside of you, right? There are two nations inside of you, and the way that the word goyim, which means nations, is written in the Torah there is instead of the correct spelling, which is Gimel Vav Yud Mem, it's spelled Gimel Yud Yud Mem, so that it's spelled as if the word should be pronounced Geyim, and Geyim means people of stature. Ge'em means like proud or haughty or lifted up high. So hidden in the text is, even though we pronounce it one way, because the oral tradition tells us that's how it's pronounced, well, the Misorah, if you will, tells us to pronounce it that way. The written word in all the texts is spelled Geim, as if he said there are two great men inside of you, right? But not only is it pronounced Goyim, but the parallel phrase is Shnei Goyim bevitnech. There are two nations inside of you. Ushnei leumim mime'ayach yiparedu. And two leumim, a leum is also a nation. It's like another word for a nation. They shall mime'ayach yiparedu. They shall separate from your innards. Right? So we're talking about nations. That's this parallel phraseology. But there's a message about two great individuals that will come out, and our sages tell us that this was a prophetic reference, allusion, to the two great men, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Antoninus, the Roman emperor named Antoninus, who I told you in the previous class is probably Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who was one of the greatest Roman emperors, one of the most benevolent, one of the most progressive Roman emperors that ever was. Because these two were very close friends. And these two had a symbiotic relationship, in that when the Jews had suffered so terribly under the Romans, and they had this respite for the time being that Marcus Aurelius Antoninus was the emperor, and Rebbe was able to compile the Mishnah underneath the benevolent governance of Antoninus, and he got it done in time that when the next crazy emperor took over, who happened to be Antoninus' son, Commodus Verus. And if you ever saw the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, okay, in the beginning of the movie, and he's this gladiator, Maximus, whatever. In the beginning of the movie, he's talking to the old Roman emperor who's like close to death. That's Marcus Aurelius. He's the nice good emperor. But his son is a psychopath, and he's the chief antagonist in the movie. Commodus. These were real people that our sages have shared information with us about. And the sages were very concerned that Commodus should not become the emperor after Antoninus, because he had another son who was not quite as virtuous as Antoninus, but he wasn't quite as psychotic as Commodus was. And unfortunately, it wasn't in Hashem's plan, because that son died. He died of sickness or whatever before he could ever take the throne, or before he could assume the throne after his father. So the crazy Commodus Verus came in, who was not just a villain in the Academy Award-winning picture Gladiator, but he was a villain in real life. And the Jews suffered from him. So it was very fortuitous. So this symbiosis between Esav and Yaakov was always meant to be. That's the ideal of what it was meant to be from the beginning, but Esav went awry. And what it ultimately will be is sort of that Esav is the body and Yisrael, Yaakov, is the soul. We're the brains and he's the brawn. Hakol kol Yaakov, as Yitzchak says, the voice is the voice of Yaakov. Yadayim yidei Esav, and the hands are the hands of Esav. That's the symbiosis that's meant to be. Why am I saying that? That even within the Jewish people, in other words, if it doesn't happen on a symbiotic level between nations, but there is on a microcosm, that's a macro level, but on a microcosmic level, within the Jewish people, there are different approaches to serve God, and one is the Yaakov approach, which is a more spiritual approach, and one is the Esav approach, which is a more physical, worldly approach. Okay, and neither one of these approaches are wrong, and they both have their place, and they're both necessary, and they're both valuable. So it could be, now that's a long way to go to answer a question I wasn't prepared for, but it could be that in some of the nuschaos, in some of the texts, for some of the groups within the Jewish nation that have a more conciliatory tone, that is their avoda. That's how they're meant to approach God. And there are other tribes that maybe have a little bit more of a direct, forceful tone. And that's the way they're meant to approach and serve God. I mentioned in another class, and we're going to lose our time to learn this bracha, but I mentioned another class that in Shir Hashirim and in other places, Tehillim, Hashem describes his relationship with the Jews in different terminology, with different pronouns and different descriptors. Sometimes the Jewish people is called a daughter. Sometimes the Jewish people is called a sister. Sometimes the Jewish people is called a twin sibling. Sometimes the Jewish people is called mother, right? We're Hashem's daughter, we're Hashem's sibling, we're Hashem's twin, we're Hashem's parent. These are different relationships. There are different approaches to serving God. There are different times that call for different approaches, and we could hash those out another time. But my point being that what you're describing is not absent from any text of tefillah. There are groups that do it that way. There are groups that do it this way, and there's a place. I think there's a place and time for many different approaches, and we're accepting of them all. If that's okay. Yeah. And if not, talk to me privately. Okay, so let's move forward a little bit. Tekabe shofar gadol l'cheirusenu. Blow the big shofar for our freedom. Where does this phraseology come from? It comes from Tanach, not surprisingly. There's more than one place in Tanach where it speaks about God blowing a great shofar. There are two that I've written down that I'm aware of. There may be more, but I came across two in my preparation. One is Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 27, verse 13, which says the following. It says, V'haya b'yom hahu, it shall be on that day, and this is talking about the Messianic era. Go take a look, it's very clear. On that day, Yitaka b'shofar gadol. Now, Yitaka is it's a passive verb. It means that the shofar gadol will be blown. It doesn't identify the blower. It will be blown. Yitoka. Uva'u, and then Uva'u ha'ovedim be'eretz Ashur. Those who are ovdim, those who are lost in the lands of Ashur, which literally means Assyria, shall come. V'hanidachim, and those who are, remember, Nidchayam Yisrael. Hanidachim, those who are pushed away. Be'eretz Mitzrayim, those who are pushed away in the land of Egypt, they shall also come. V'hishtachavu laHashem b'har hakodesh b'Yerushalayim, and they will bow to God in the holy mountain in Jerusalem, on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. Okay? Fine. Who's the blower? So we know from Zechariah chapter 9, verse 14, which says the following. It says, V'Hashem alehem yera'eh, Hashem will appear over them. V'yatzach barak chitzo, and his chitz, his arrow, shall go out like a bolt of lightning. V'Hashem Elokim bashofar yeska, or yitka. Hashem will blow. Yitka, active verb. Like here, taka, blow. Hashem will blow bashofar. He'll blow the shofar. V'halach basaros teman, and he'll go with the storms of the south, whatever that means. It's enigmatic, and I don't want to get into it. But we have identified the blower of the shofar is Hashem. And when that happens, it's going to herald the ingathering of the exiles. Now, is this shofar blowing literal or not? Does Hashem actually have a great big shofar that he's going to blow, and we're going to hear a giant shofar sound? You know? It's going to rock the earth. And then we go, oh, that's the sound I've been waiting for. Is it literal? So I'll save you time. From what I've seen in the commentaries, this is not considered to be a literal sound, but it is sort of going to be this internal hearing or internal awakening. The hearing of the shofar, this call, it's like the shofar is a wake-up call, you know? We're going to wake up, and it's not just us, the whole world is going to wake up and become aware of the truth. That is the shofar blowing. It's going to be some type of internal awakening. Fine. So, yeah.
So this, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm just kind of catching up here with it. So this is talking about the Messianic era. This is talking about Mashiach.
Right.
Because Mashiach is the one that's...
This is the beginning of that section requesting the Messianic era to ensue.
Is there a way to also relate to it right now in the present?
Is there a way to relate to it right now in the present? I think so. I hope I can demonstrate that that's the case. Okay? So, first of all, it's much easier to relate to it now in the present than it was 100 or 200 years ago, because we're very much seeing in front of our eyes these events taking place. Not fully, by any means, because we don't see Mashiach yet. Now, is it required that Mashiach has to be here for this to happen? I don't know, but I'll tell you what the Navi says. In Sefer Yeshayahu, the verse I read to you was chapter 27, verse 13. But in chapter 11, it says the following, verse 10, in Yeshayahu, same book, same author, it says as following, V'haya bayom hahu, it will be on that day. Remember that language? Shoresh Yishai, the root of Yishai, the root of Jesse, that is the family of Yishai, the father of David. So we're talking about a person from this lineage. Asher Omeid Lenes Amim. He will stand as a nace, as a banner, Amim, of the nations. A love Goyim Yidroshu. To him, nations shall seek. V'hayasamenu chaso kavod. And his rest shall be honor. That's a reference to the peace that's going to ensue at that time. So, when it talks about the now that's verse 10. Okay, now what's verse 11? What comes right after it? You ready? Here's the next verse. But the point I'm making with that verse is, it talks about actually a person from the descendancy, from the lineage of King David. The Mashiach himself is being referenced here very clearly as someone who will be the nace, he will be the banner. Okay, because it says he will stand as the banner. And the banner is going to be not just for us, it's going to be for everybody, right? Universal knowledge of Hashem. Deya, that correspondence of knowledge. Here's the next verse. V'haya bayom hahu, and it shall be on that day. Yosef Hashem shenis yado. Hashem will add once again his hand, or whatever, increase his hand. Liknos es she'ar amo, to acquire she'ar amo, the remainder of his nation. Asher yisha'er, that will remain. Me Ashur, from Assyria. Umi Mitzrayim, from Egypt. Umi Pasros, Umi Kush, these are all these different places. Umi Elam, Umi Shinar, Umi Chamas, Umi Eayam, all these places, and from the islands of the sea. Hashem's going to acquire the remainder of his nation on that day. The Nasa Nes Lagoyim, and he shall raise up a nes, a banner. V'sa nes, that's what it says in the bracha. The Nasa Nes Lagoyim, he's going to raise up a banner to the nations. The Asaf Nidchei Yisrael, and he shall gather, is a different verb here, of Asaf. It's a different gathering. What the difference is, I haven't considered yet. See? He will gather Nidchei Yisrael, those cast away of the Jewish nation. Unufutzos Yehuda Yikabetz, and again he'll gather with the verb of kibbutz, gathering, like we had before. The Nefutzos Yehuda, those of Judah who are spread out. May arba kanfos arch, from the four corners of the earth. This verse is almost verbatim the blessing that we're saying. Which brings me to Cliff's comment. Which brings me to the Nefesh HaChaim. The Nefesh HaChaim says, like I told you before, we're asking the world to come to an ideal state. I mentioned in that class where we talked about God blessing the world as bringing the world to an ideal state, is that was God's entire purpose in creating the world, was to create a world in which we receive his goodness in the most ultimate fashion. And our job is to bring that about. So everything that we're doing to bring the world to its final perfection, which was Hashem's intention in bringing the world, and therefore we know it's his desire. So therefore, says the Nefesh HaChaim, when a person is davening, he's supposed to have the intent, I'm not asking for myself, I'm asking for you, God, so to speak. Meaning, I want to be a vessel to fulfill your will. And this is how, because I know this is what you want. So I'm praying as one of the aside from the commandments that I'm fulfilling and whatever spiritual effects that has on the world, I'm also using my mouth to pray for these things. And that should be your intent in every single one of your tefillas, even when it's for yourself. But the idea is, whatever I'm asking God for to enhance my life in some way is so that I can be better equipped to bring God's will and vision into the world. So like Cliff said, please, like, for me, no, for you, this is what you want. Allow me to be that vessel, right? So the lack of conciliatory language maybe could be that, God, I'm just trying to do what you want, right? So here, this is what Hashem is promising us. This is what I'm going to do. So we're like, okay, let's get going over here. Okay, why did I say all that? So much to say. Because it seems like the person of Mashiach, I read you those 3 verses, 10, 11, 12, in chapter 11 of Yeshayahu. Okay, so there's more, but leave it aside for now. It seems that the Mashiach, the person of the Mashiach, is an integral ingredient in this coming about, in its fullest, in its fullness. However, it seems that it could also come partially, even without Mashiach here yet, which is maybe why we were wondering in previous classes, why do we leave the request for Mashiach as like the last one? We ask for the ingathering, we ask for the restoration of justice and the reward for the righteous and the building of Yerushalayim, and then for Tzemach David, then for the descendant of David to come and sort of finalize it all. But isn't he supposed to be here the whole time? So it seems like there are things that he does and there are things that happen even without him. For example, we had in the time of Koresh, who was the emperor of Persia, the Persian Empire, Koresh, that he makes this big announcement, in the name of the God of the Jews, chief God over all the earth. He says, I proclaim that the Jews should return to their land and rebuild, and da-da-da-da. And in fact, Yeshayahu himself, a couple of hundred years before it happened, identifies Koresh by name in the text, and he's called, in the text, he's called Meshicho, I think. He's called the Mashiach, the Messiah of God, but meaning in the literal sense that he's anointed Mashiach means anointed, because he was a king of Persia. But more than that, he had a purpose. Hashem had put him into the world for this purpose of bringing about the rebuilding of the temple. Now, who failed over there? We failed, because only a small minority of the Jewish people returned at that time. So the second temple period was with a minority of the Jews in Israel and a majority of the Jews outside of Israel. In my opinion, I don't think this is just my opinion, that could have developed into something much more. I think the Gemara says this in Brachos, that the return of the Jews in the time of Ezra was supposed to be as glorious as in the time of Yehoshua, when they came with great miracles, the splitting of the Jordan River, etc. And it's supported with a verse in the Shir Asayam and the Az Yashir, the Song of the Sea that we say, where it says, Ad Ya'avor Amecha Hashem, Ad Ya'avor Amzu Kanisa, until your nation passes, O God, until the nation passes that you have acquired. So why is the phraseology twice of the nation passing? Because there was a crossing, like Ya'avor, crossing, like crossing the Jordan. There was a crossing into the land by Yehoshua. That was the first Ya'avor Amcha Hashem, the crossing of the nation into the land, was with Yeshua. And then there was a second one, and it's juxtaposed to the first one. It says the second one, which was with Ezra, should have been as glorious as the one with Yeshua by virtue of the fact that they're juxtaposed in the first. It means they should have been equivalent. Should have been. Isn't it a verse? Isn't it a prophecy? What happened? So the Gemara says, Garam hachet. As a result of sin, they didn't merit it. But doesn't it have to come? So it seems like that second Ya'avor, that second return to the land with great miracles and fanfare as the first time, is yet to come. But it could have come. We messed up, right? We're living in an incredible time because this is extremely, extremely historic. This is the first time in history, today, right here as we sit here, since the first temple, meaning this did not happen during the second temple period, and it's happening right now, that the largest Jewish community in the world is presently in Israel. That doesn't mean the majority of Jews are in Israel. But that means until a few years ago, maybe even less than a few years ago, I don't remember exactly the year, but very recently, the largest Jewish community in the world was in the United States, numbering about 6 million Jews. Okay? And in Israel, there was like close to that number, or like 6 point something, but there was like a few decimal points more in the United States. Now the United States Jewish population, I don't know what it is smaller than the Jewish population in Israel. And again, until then, the United States had the largest Jewish population. Any other country you go to, as big as the population of Jews might be, it's nowhere near the amount. I think maybe worldwide, if you add up all the Jews in the world outside of Israel and America, you get about 1 million. Then you have about 6 million in America and about 6 million in Israel. But we tipped the scales now in Israel for the first time since the original exile. Meaning we were all together until the Babylonians exiled us. Since the Babylonians exiled us, 2,500 years ago, whatever it was, we had never amassed enough Jews in Israel to be the largest Jewish community until our own present day. Okay? So now, when that happened, by the way, I figured out that it was the 70th year so you could figure the year, I don't do math. It was the 70th year of the Jewish state, of the state of Israel. So 70 is a good number, right? I mean, it's a significant number. On the 70th year, in the 70th year of the state of Israel, that is when we achieved that number of the largest Jewish community on earth in the land of Israel since that time. What makes it more amazing to me is that, again, whether you consider this significant or not, I'm not commenting or even expressing an opinion. I'm just going to say what it is. The year 1948 is the year that the state of Israel became a state. In the Jewish rendering of years, in the year 1948 from creation was when Avraham Avinu was born. Okay? Is that significant? You make up your own mind. However, in Avram's 70th year, according to our sages, and this is not explicit in the text. Meaning, if you look in the text, it seems like this. Avraham is 75 years old. He goes to Israel. and all those things happen in that parsha, including Hashem doing the covenant between the parts, the bris bein habasarim. He cuts up the animals, and God said, "I promise you, your children will be strangers in a strange land, and then they're going to return to this land, and this land's going to belong to your children, and it'll be like the stars in the heaven and the dust of the earth." It seems from the flow of the text that all this happened post Avram's 75th year. However, our sages tell us this is not the case. Our sages tell us that this chapter is out of order, and that section, that covenant between the parts, the bris bein habasarim, happened when Avraham was 70 years old. It happened 5 years prior to his entering the land, which means in his 70th year is when God promised him these things. And in the 70th year following 1948, in our calendrical common counting, is when this momentous historic event occurred, right? Now, I don't know what we're holding because I don't do math, but it occurs to me then, I always think, I have a question mark. So what's going to happen 75 years after the state of Israel? When Avraham is 75 and Hashem told him, Lech lecha, get up and go to the land of Israel. That was in his 75th year. So if we're lining 1948, 70 years later. Okay, what about 75? We're in between right now, 70 and 75. What's going to happen in 75? I don't know. I'm not a prophet, but if the numbers are to be taken as significant, I'm very excited. So being that animated, so that's relevant on its own, but it's relevant on many other levels too. And we're running out of time, so I'm gonna try to wind it down. Okay, so here's how it's relevant to us right now, even more. Blow the shofar. It's an internal awakening, not just for us, for the world. L'cheiruseinu, for our freedom. What is this freedom? So says RAV SCHWAB, it's a freedom on many levels. It's a freedom of the feeling of dependency on the other nations. We have not achieved this. Meaning Israel today, as many Jews as there are living there, and more and more every day, thank God, Israel still is very much dependent on the United States of America and the ascent of the other nations, right? We haven't yet risen to, and built our backbone to the point where we're saying, I don't need any of you guys. I got God. We're still not proclaiming that. Right? So that level of freedom, that level of independence, we haven't achieved. Independence from the nations. But the way I also think of it, I don't remember if RAV SCHWAB said this in this book or just something that I thought of, here we are, as some of you pointed out, here we are in the United States of America, and I think we haven't made the leap to go and make Aliyah because we also kind of feel these barriers to doing so. Right? If I went around the room and I asked each of you, why aren't you living in Israel? We'd all have our reasons. And I'm not invalidating any of them because Shulchan Aruch tells us there are reasons for which a person is permitted to not live in Israel, among them Parnasa. Okay? That means livelihood. So I'm not saying everyone is required. There are legitimate reasons. However, if we haven't freed ourselves of those things, if we don't feel free, if we legitimately aren't free of them, then we haven't achieved the cheiruseinu that we're talking about in this bracha, according to RAV SCHWAB. Continuing, lift up the banner, bring in the exiles, gather us together, kabetzenu yachad. What does it mean, kabetzenu yachad? I asked this in the beginning. Gather us together. Well, how do you gather someone apart? He says it's not just enough that we should be physically gathered together. I'm saying what RAV SCHWAB says, but we have to also be of one accord. We have to get along with each other. Right now in Eretz Yisrael, there's terrible internal strife. Not just in the Knesset building, in the streets, on the buses. There's a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of infighting. We haven't achieved the yachad, right? And whether that needs a physical ingathering or that even can be achieved, even when we're physically scattered, halavai, if only we could be yachad, if only we could be have a feeling of togetherness. And it doesn't mean brainwashing. It doesn't mean we all agree on everything. But it means that we respect one another and are able to get along and live together and not be hateful of one Jew to another. So, v'kabetzenu yachad. That I'm going to relate to one more thing, and I think we'll pause, which is, RAV SCHWAB quotes brilliantly the verses in at the end of Yaakov's life. At the end of Yaakov's life, it's really beautiful how he ties this in. At the end of Yaakov's life, it says this is in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 49, verses 1 and 2. It says, Vayikra Yaakov el banav. Yaakov called to his sons. Vayomer. And he says, Hey Asifu, gather together. We saw that word, Hey Asifu, in one of the prophecies in Yeshayahu about the ingathering. But he says to his sons, Hey Asifu, gather. Ve'agida lachem, and I will tell you, Asher Yikra Eschem be'acharis hayamim, which is translated as, what will happen to you in the end of days. However, says Rav Schwab, if you look at the spelling of the word Yikra, phonetically it's a homonym with the word that meaning the word that kara, to call, is a homonym with the word kara, to happen. But the difference in spelling is kara, to call, is spelled with an aleph, and kara, to happen, is spelled with a hey. Same pronunciation, but one letter difference. It's translated here in all the translations as, I will tell you what will happen to you in the end of days. But it's not spelled that way. It's spelled with an aleph, which means, if you read it literally, and it only makes sense in the context that I've built for you, let me tell you what will call to you in the end of the days. What will call to you. And we've been talking about blowing the shofar. There's going to be a calling in the end of days. And remember he said, gather. What's the next word? The next pasuk beis. He kavitzu, gather together. He kavitzu, from that word kabetz. He kavitzu, gather through. Vishem'u, and hear and listen. Bnei Yaakov, gather and listen, sons of Jacob. So Rav Schwab relates this in two ways. Number one is the ingathering, which comes with the hearing of the shofar. Something's going to call you in the end of days. Come together, but also listening means not just come together physically. He kavatzu v'shim'u, listen to one another, be understanding, be tolerant, hear what's right and what's true, and change your mind about those things you've been wrong about. It's an internal transformation, not just a physical gathering, but a coming together of the minds and the souls. So there's a lot of ways in which this is relevant to us today, not just because physically in front of our eyes we see there is a partial fulfillment, as there was to a certain degree long ago, but even more today. And we're waiting for a few more pieces to fall into place. But it's clearly happening. It's totally historic. There's no precedent for it, right? We're in this process right now. Sitting here now, we're unique. We're unique time, a unique generation that we're witnessing to this. But not just that, but also on the level of internally coming together. That's something that needs to happen, whether we're physically together or not. But hopefully, with Hashem's help, we should merit to be physically together and spiritually together. B'mheira v'yameinu. Pause. I'm very excited.